pristine marble steps were cold against my back, a shocking final punctuation to the life I had known. The heavy oak door of my childhood home slammed shut, the sound of the deadbolt clicking into place as absolute as a judge's gavel. It echoed in the unnerving quiet of the manicured cul-de-sac, a sound that meant the end. On the perfectly green lawn beside me, dewy and impossibly vibrant, sat a single, battered leather suitcase. It was my grandfather's, and it was, they had decreed, my only severance package from the family. "And don't you even think about coming back, you ungrateful little brat!" My stepmother, Eleanor, her voice a shrill instrument of triumphant venom, screeched through the brass mail slot. Her words were followed by the tinkling, cruel laughter of my stepsister, Clara. It was a sound I had come to associate with every small humiliation I had endured for the last decade. I didn't cry. The tears had long since dried up, leaving behind a cold, hard resolve. I didn't beg or plead. What would be the point? There was no mercy to be found in that house. I slowly, deliberately, pushed myself to my feet, brushing the damp grass from the back of my thin, worn jeans. My gaze fell upon the bay window where three figures were silhouetted against the warm interior light. Eleanor and Clara stood like twin vultures, their arms crossed, radiating smug satisfaction, and behind them, a little to the side, was the ghost of my father, his shoulders slumped in that familiar posture of weak, pathetic surrender. He wouldn't meet my eyes, even from a distance. They were watching me, all three of them, waiting for the performance they expected. They wanted to see me crumble into a heap of despair on their perfect lawn. They wanted the satisfaction of knowing they had broken me, that they were casting me into a world of poverty and struggle, with nothing more than a few changes of clothes and a dusty, worthless heirloom. It was the final scene of their long-running play, and I was supposed to exit the stage a tragic figure, but as I reached down and wrapped my fingers around the worn handle of the suitcase, a strange and powerful calm settled over me. It was heavier than it should have been, a dense, reassuring weight. A genuine smile, small and secret, touched my lips. They thought they were giving me my grandfather's old junk, a final insult. They had no idea what he had really left me inside this shabby leather shell. They didn't know this suitcase was my salvation, my weapon, and the seed of their eventual spectacular destruction. They couldn't possibly know that what they saw as a symbol of my poverty was, in fact, filled to the brim with bearer bonds. My walk down the long, curving driveway was the steadiest I'd ever felt. Each step was a silent vow. This wasn't an exile. It was a release. The motel room smelled of stale cigarettes and pine-scented cleaner, a chemical cocktail of transient lives. It was a world away from the lavender and cedar potpourri Eleanor insisted upon, and for that, I was grateful. I heaved the suitcase onto the lumpy chenille bedspread and stared at it, my heart hammering against my ribs. The click of the brass latches sounded like gunshots in the sterile silence. This was the moment of truth. I hadn't opened it since my grandfather, his hands gnarled and trembling with age, had pressed it into mine 2 years ago, just a week before he passed away in his sleep. His eyes, usually clouded with the mists of his 90 years, had been piercingly clear that afternoon in the dusty, sun-drenched chaos of his study. "Anya," he'd whispered, his voice a dry rustle of old paper, "this is your real inheritance. Your mother, bless her soul, would have wanted you to have this. It's a secret, our secret. Never tell them about it, not your father, and especially not that woman and her vapid daughter. When the time is right, when you feel the walls closing in, this will be your freedom, your escape hatch. Don't you dare open it until you are well and truly on your own." Well, I was on my own now, more alone than I had ever been. With a deep breath, I lifted the lid. There were no neatly folded clothes, no sentimental photo albums. Instead, my eyes were met with the sight of hundreds upon hundreds of crisp, engraved certificates, stacked in neat, tight bundles and bound with simple paper bands. Cream-colored paper, intricate green and black borders, and the imposing, old-fashioned signatures of long-dead financiers. Bearer bonds, the financial equivalent of a ghost, unregistered, untraceable, and belonging wholly to whomever physically possessed them. I reached out a trembling hand and lifted the top bundle. The denomination printed in elegant script on the first certificate was $10,000. I fanned it with my thumb. There had to be 50 of them in that one stack alone. And there were dozens of such stacks. My knees went weak, and I sat down hard on the edge of the bed. My grandfather hadn't just left me a safety net, he had bequeathed me an arsenal. As I stared at the fortune, my mind, unbidden, reeled back through the bleak landscape of the past 10 years. My own mother, a woman I remembered only in soft, focused flashes of warm smiles and the scent of cinnamon, died of a sudden illness when I was 6. The hole she left in my life and in my father's heart was vast and terrifying. And into that void, less than a year later, stepped Eleanor. She arrived with her cloying perfume, her sharp-edged smile, and her daughter Clara, a girl my exact age who seemed to have been born with a PhD in casual cruelty. From that day forward, my home became their kingdom, and I, the inconvenient relic of a former reign, the campaign of erasure started subtly. My favorite dolls would vanish from my room, only to reappear in Clara's, their hair crudely chopped off, their dresses torn. My drawings were accidentally thrown away by the cleaning lady Eleanor hired. When I won the 3rd grade spelling bee, the celebratory dinner my father promised was preempted by Clara's sudden dramatic migraine, which required a full evening of coddling and comfort from both of them. My small victory was forgotten. As we grew older, the abuse simply matured with us, becoming more sophisticated and far more damaging. The most significant blow came when I was 16. My mother, a firm believer in the power of education, had started a college fund for me the day I was born. Over the years, it had grown into a substantial sum, my one guaranteed ticket out of that house. Then, one evening at dinner, Eleanor announced her grand plan. "We've decided to reinvest Anya's college fund," she declared, her tone leaving no room for discussion. She beamed at Clara. "Our Clara is on the cusp of becoming a major brand ambassador. These things require capital. Think of the trips, the wardrobe, the networking events. It's an investment in the family's future, in our social standing." I had stared at my father, my blood running cold. "Dad, you can't. Mom saved that for me, for my education." He wouldn't meet my eyes. He just poked at his steak, his face a mask of weary defeat. "Anya, be reasonable. Clara's opportunities are happening right now. College will still be there in a few years. We can take out loans." "It's for the family's image, dear," Eleanor had cooed, placing her perfectly manicured hand over mine. Her touch felt like a spider. "A rising tide lifts all boats, after all. You should be happy for your sister." The tide rose, but my boat sank without a trace. Clara got her sponsored trips to Bali and Milan. She got her designer wardrobe. And I got the quiet, crushing knowledge that my dreams were considered a lesser, disposable commodity. My only sanctuary in those years was my grandfather's house, a dusty, book-filled Victorian that smelled of old paper and pipe tobacco. He was my mother's father, a quiet, shrewd man who had built a small but significant fortune in his youth through old-world investments. He lived modestly, despising the flashy, hollow consumerism that Eleanor and Clara worshipped. They saw him as a senile old miser, a tedious obligation to be endured on holidays in the hope of a fat inheritance. They tolerated my weekly visits, seeing them as a convenient way to get me out from under their feet. Those afternoons were the only time I felt seen, the only time I felt my own mind was a thing of value. He taught me chess and made me read the Wall Street Journal. He'd explain the intricacies of stock options and corporate bonds, of market psychology and the art of the long game. "Never mistake weakness for kindness, Anya," he'd say, his gaze pointed as he watched me across the chessboard. "Your father is not a cruel man, but he is a weak one. And weakness, in the face of cruelty, is a form of permission." He saw everything. He saw the way my clothes were always a little shabbier than Clara's, the way my eyes had lost their childhood light. When the lawyer read his will, the air in the polished conference room was thick with greedy anticipation. It was a bitter disappointment for them. He left his beloved house and its vast library to the State Historical Society. he bequeathed a token amount of cash to my father, just enough to be respectable, but not enough to fund their lifestyle. Eleanor was incandescent with rage for weeks, muttering about the ungrateful old fool and how he'd clearly been manipulated by the Historical Society. They never gave a second thought to the battered leather suitcase he'd pressed into my hands, the one they'd dismissively tossed into the back of my closet and forgotten about. It was just more of the old man's junk. Now, sitting on that lumpy motel bed, surrounded by what I was beginning to realize was a life-altering fortune, the last decade of my life coalesced into a single, burning point of pain. It wasn't just the stolen college fund, it was the 1,000 tiny cuts. The constant gaslighting that made me question my own sanity. The casual cruelty that was their daily language. The final, brutal act of casting me out the moment I turned 18. The second their legal obligation to house me had expired. They hadn't just neglected me, they had actively tried to demolish my spirit, to reduce me to a non-entity so that their precious Clara could shine brighter against my dullness. They expected me to fail. They wanted me to fail. To become a sad little story they could tell at their country club luncheons, proof of their magnanimity in having put up with such a difficult child for so long. A cold, hard clarity washed over me, extinguishing the last embers of grief and self-pity. This was not just money for a new life. This was justice, packed in paper bundles. This was power. My grandfather hadn't just given me a key to escape. He had given me a sword. And I would be damned if I didn't learn how to wield it. The decision solidified in my heart, no longer a vague desire for revenge, but a cold, calculated business plan. I would not just survive. I would not just thrive. I would systematically, patiently, and devastatingly dismantle the entire world they had built on my suffering. They had taught me the value of a ruthless investment. It was time to show them what I had learned. My war began not in a boardroom, but in the hushed, sacred silence of a public library in a city where no one knew my name. For 3 weeks, I lived a nocturnal existence, sleeping in cheap motels by day and spending my nights hunched over a laptop in a quiet carrel, fueled by vending machine coffee. I devoured books on international finance, corporate law, offshore banking, and strategic warfare. I read Sun Tzu's The Art of War and Machiavelli's The Prince, seeing their ancient wisdom not as history but as a practical instruction manual. My enemies were my family, and I knew their vanities, their fears, and their weaknesses intimately. My first operational step was to give birth to a new person. Anya, the discarded daughter, had to die. In her place, Anya Roth was born. The name was a quiet tribute to my grandfather, a nod to his mother's maiden name. It felt right, a way of carrying his legacy with me into battle. The process was expensive and required navigating a shadowy world of discreet professionals. I used a carefully liquidated portion of the bonds. A nerve-wracking process involving a trip to the Cayman Islands and a meeting with a banker who asked no questions. To purchase a new identity, a new birth certificate, a new social security number, a new passport. On paper, Anya Roth was a Swiss heiress, the scion of an old private banking family, educated in Europe and notoriously reclusive. The story was just plausible enough to be believed and just vague enough to be unprovable. My next step was to acquire the education they had stolen from me. I enrolled in a prestigious business school in Zurich, a place where my manufactured background would go entirely unquestioned among the children of the global elite. For 3 intense years, I became a ghost. While Clara was posting filtered selfies from Ibiza and whining about the quality of the champagne, I was mastering derivatives trading and the art of the leveraged buyout. While Eleanor was chairing committees for her self-aggrandizing charity galas, I was learning how to dissect a balance sheet and identify the fatal flaw in any corporate structure. I wasn't just a student. I was a soldier in training, and my curriculum was the language of power, money. The fortune my grandfather had left me was the seed capital. Under my careful, aggressive, and now highly educated stewardship, it grew, branching out through a labyrinth of shell corporations and offshore investment funds. I founded a boutique venture capital firm, Roth Capital, headquartered in Geneva. It was a whisper in the financial world, a ghost entity with a small, fiercely loyal team who knew me only as Miss Roth, their brilliant and enigmatic boss who communicated primarily through encrypted emails. From my sterile, glass-walled office overlooking Lake Geneva, I began to build my web. My targets were clearly defined, each with their own unique vulnerability. Target 1, my father. His company, Miller Homes, was his entire identity. It was a moderately successful regional construction firm, but I knew from years of hearing him complain at the dinner table that it was his source of pride, his legacy. It was also, I discovered through deep financial analysis, dangerously over-leveraged and slow to adapt to new technologies. Target 2, Eleanor. Her currency wasn't money, but social capital. Her position as the queen bee of the local elite, the chairwoman of every important committee, was her lifeblood. She lived for the fawning respect and envy of her peers. Target 3, Clara. Her entire existence was a curated fantasy, a fragile online persona built on sponsorships, borrowed luxury, and the fleeting adoration of strangers. Her self-worth was directly tied to her follower count. I would take everything from them, not with a single dramatic blow, but through a slow, agonizing process of 1,000 cuts, just as they had done to me. My first move was against my father. Through a series of discrete transactions, Roth Capital began buying up his company's debt from secondary lenders. It was a simple, quiet process. To him, we were just another faceless creditor on a quarterly report. He never saw the puppet master pulling the strings. The real squeeze began when Miller Homes won the bid for the largest municipal project in the city's history, a massive downtown revitalization that he had boasted would be his masterpiece, the project that would make his name immortal. He had staked the company's entire future on it. I read the project proposals, the supply chain logistics, the personnel assignments. I knew his strategy better than he did. 2 months into the project, his primary steel supplier was suddenly acquired by a mysterious European investment conglomerate. The new owners immediately canceled all existing contracts, citing a strategic realignment. The price of steel on the open market tripled for him overnight. That conglomerate was, of course, a subsidiary of Roth Capital. Next, I poached his 3 most experienced and essential project managers. My offers were obscene, including signing bonuses that were more than their annual salaries, full relocation packages for their families to anywhere in the world, and positions at a new, innovative construction tech firm I had established for this exact purpose. They resigned on the same day. The project ground to a halt. The city threatened him with crippling fines for the delays. The media, which had once hailed him as a visionary, now painted him as an incompetent fool. My father grew desperate. He began taking out a series of high-interest bridge loans to try and stop the bleeding. The lender of last resort, a private equity firm with a reputation for being ruthless, was another branch of my empire. He was frantically borrowing my money to fight a war that I was orchestrating against him. His pride was being systematically dismantled, and he had no idea his own daughter was the one holding the hammer. With my father's empire beginning to crumble, I turned my attention to Eleanor. Her magnum opus, the source of all her social power, was the annual Starlight Gala, a charity ball for the local children's hospital that was the undisputed pinnacle of the city's social calendar. As chairwoman of the gala committee, she wielded her power with the grace of a medieval monarch, deciding who was worthy of a spot on the dais, who was granted a desirable table, and who was snubbed. The local society pages chronicled her every move for months leading up to the event. So I decided to throw a better party. 6 weeks before the Starlight Gala, the 100 most influential and wealthiest figures in the city received a thick, cream-colored invitation, hand-delivered by courier. Embossed with a simple, elegant R, it was an invitation to the inaugural Roth Foundation charity benefit. The foundation, the invitation explained, was a new philanthropic endeavor by a reclusive European heiress, Anya Roth, dedicated to funding arts and music education for underprivileged children. The theme was an evening in Vienna, and the event was scheduled for the exact same night as Eleanor's gala. I spared no expense. It was an exercise in overwhelming financial firepower. I booked the city's stunning new modern art museum, a far more chic and exclusive venue than the stuffy old hotel ballroom Eleanor always used. I hired a 3 Michelin-starred chef from Paris and flew his entire team in for the event. The entertainment was a private performance by a world-renowned cellist, followed by a quiet, intimate set from a Grammy-winning jazz singer. The minimum donation for a single ticket was 10 times that of the Starlight Gala, ensuring an unparalleled level of exclusivity. And I announced that the Roth Foundation would match every dollar raised, doubling the impact of every donation. Eleanor, I heard through my sources, was initially dismissive. Who was this Anya Roth? A nobody, a flash in the pan. Her arrogance was her undoing. She assumed her years of social dominance were an unbreakable shield. But the city's elite were notoriously fickle, always chasing the next bright, shiny thing. An invitation to my event became the ultimate status symbol, the only party that mattered. The RSVPs to her gala trickled to a halt. Tables were canceled. Longtime corporate sponsors quietly pulled their funding and redirected it to my foundation, eager to curry favor with the mysterious new power player in town. The night of the events, I sat in a luxurious hotel suite across the street from the museum, watching a multi-screen live feed from both venues provided by my private security team. The contrast was devastating. My museum was a glittering wonderland of crystal, music, and laughter, packed with senators, tech billionaires, and the city's old money scions. The media was in a frenzy, their primetime anchors broadcasting live from my red carpet. Meanwhile, the feed from Eleanor's ballroom showed a sad, half-empty room. The few guests who had shown up out of a sense of obligation looked miserable, clustered in small groups, constantly checking their phones for social media updates from my party. A stray camera caught a close-up of Eleanor's face. The practiced, smiling mask of the perfect hostess had shattered, replaced by a rictus of raw, public humiliation. Her reign was over, and she had been dethroned, not in a secret coup, but in a dazzling public spectacle that no one would ever forget. Finally, there was Clara, my dear stepsister. Her entire identity was her curated online persona, at Clara Dazzles. She had amassed a respectable following and a handful of minor brand deals, but she was desperate for the big one, the campaign that would launch her into the stratosphere of true influencer royalty. I built her the perfect irresistible trap. Roth Capital established a new shell corporation, a luxury wellness and beauty brand called Elysian. We spent 6 months and millions of dollars building its mystique online. We hired the best marketers, created a stunningly aesthetic website, and sent free products to A-list celebrities, generating a tidal wave of authentic-seeming buzz. Elysian was positioned as the next big thing, the epitome of clean, exclusive, aspirational living. Then we made Clara an offer she couldn't possibly refuse. A multi-year, multi-million-dollar contract to be the exclusive global face of Elysian. She and her agent were so blinded by the numbers and the prestige that they barely glanced at the fine print of the ironclad 200-page contract I had had my legal team draft. It contained a particularly nasty and unbreakable morals clause, as well as language that gave the company complete and total creative control over all marketing campaigns. She signed it in a flurry of excited social media posts. For 2 glorious months, we gave her the life she'd always dreamed of. We flew her first class to Paris for a photo shoot on a private yacht on the Seine. We put her smiling face on digital billboards in Times Square in Tokyo. Her follower count exploded. Her ego, already substantial, swelled to epic proportions. She was insufferable, and it was perfect. Then, at midnight on a coordinated global launch day, we executed the pivot. Every Elysian ad, every billboard, every social media post was replaced. The new campaign launched with a single devastating tagline, Elysian for when life's rhythm gets irregular. The product, the beautifully packaged, revitalizing wellness tonic she had been gushing about for weeks, was revealed to be a new, high-end, maximum-strength laxative for people suffering from chronic constipation. The glossy photos of Clara looking ethereal and glamorous on the yacht were now plastered next to bold text about promoting digestive health and ensuring regularity. The massive billboard in Times Square now featured her serene, smiling face next to the words, Elysian, find your relief. The internet, as it is wont to do, went nuclear. She became a global laughingstock within hours. The memes were relentless and savage. #Constipation Clara trended worldwide for 48 hours. Her followers abandoned her in droves, replaced by trolls who spammed every post with poop emojis. Her other, smaller sponsors immediately dropped her, invoking their own morals clauses. She was trapped. My contract was unbreakable. If she spoke ill of the brand or refused to fulfill her promotional duties, which now included sponsored posts about the importance of fiber, she would be liable for a lawsuit that would not only bankrupt her, but her entire family. Her dream career, the very thing my own dreams had been sacrificed for, had literally gone down the toilet in the most public and humiliating way imaginable. She had dazzled, and then she had fizzled. The final act was set. My father's company was in its death throes, bleeding money, its reputation in tatters. The city had canceled the revitalization project and was suing him for breach of contract. Bankruptcy was not a matter of if, but when. His only lifeline, his last desperate hope, was a full buyout offer from a notoriously aggressive but cash-rich Swiss investment firm that had suddenly shown interest. A final emergency meeting was called. He, Eleanor, and a disgraced, hollowed-out Clara were to meet the CEO of Roth Capital to negotiate the terms of their salvation. I chose the venue for the final confrontation with care, the main boardroom on the top floor of the city's tallest skyscraper. The view was a breathtaking panorama of the entire metropolis, a god's-eye view of the world my father had once dreamed of conquering. I instructed my assistant to have them brought up and then to let them wait alone for precisely 15 minutes. Let them stew in their anxiety. When the heavy glass doors finally opened, they shuffled in like condemned prisoners. My father looked like a man who had aged 20 years in the last 12 months, his expensive suit hanging off his shrunken frame. Eleanor's face was a tight mask of barely controlled rage and desperation, her socialite's poise utterly gone. And Clara, hidden behind enormous black sunglasses, looked like a fragile ghost, her usual vibrant confidence completely extinguished. They stopped dead in their tracks when they saw me. I was sitting at the head of the long, polished mahogany table. I hadn't staged the moment with any theatrics. I was just sitting there, calm and poised, a single battered leather suitcase resting on the floor beside my chair. The transformation must have been jarring. The mousy, overlooked girl in faded jeans was gone. In her place sat a woman in a bespoke charcoal gray suit, her hair styled in a severe, elegant knot, her eyes as cold and clear as the Swiss mountain air. An eternity of silence stretched across the room, thick and suffocating. My father's mouth opened and closed, but no sound came out. Eleanor's face cycled through a series of emotions: confusion, disbelief, dawning comprehension, and finally, pure, unadulterated horror. "Anya," my father finally whispered, his voice a cracked, unrecognizable rasp. "It's Miss Roth, actually," I said, my own voice perfectly even, betraying nothing. I gestured with an elegant hand to the plush leather chairs opposite me. "Please sit. We have a great deal to discuss." They sank into the chairs, their bodies moving with the jerky, unnatural motions of marionettes whose strings had just been cut. "I believe you're here to discuss the acquisition of Miller Homes," I continued, my tone all business. I slid a single sheet of paper across the vast, polished expanse of the table. "These are my terms. Roth Capital will acquire the entirety of the company, all its assets, and all its outstanding debts. In addition, you will sign over the deed to the family home on Elm Street. The purchase price for this entire package will be $1. My father stared at the document as if it were written in a foreign language. "How?" he stammered, his eyes finally lifting to meet mine. They were filled with a desperate, pleading confusion. "How is any of this possible?" "You should have paid more attention to grandfather," I said, my voice dropping the corporate pretense and taking on a sharper, more personal edge. I reached down and patted the worn leather of the suitcase beside me. "You saw this as a piece of junk, a final, pathetic insult. He saw it as my future. As it turns out, he had the foresight to pack it with several $1,000,000 worth of untraceable bearer bonds." The blood drained from Eleanor's face. Clara let out a small, choked sob from behind her sunglasses. "For the last 3 years, Anya Roth has been your worst nightmare, and you never even knew it," I explained, beginning the litany of their destruction, savoring every word. "I was the creditor who bought up your debt when you were overextended. I was the European conglomerate that acquired your steel supplier and cut you off at the knees. I was the one who offered your most vital employees deals they couldn't refuse. every sleepless night you've had this past year, every frantic phone call, every desperate loan you took just to make payroll. That was all me. My gaze shifted, locking onto Eleanor. And you. Your entire universe was built on the flimsy foundation of social status. You lived for the envy of lesser women. It must have been utterly devastating when a mysterious new philanthropist with deeper pockets, better taste, and a more compelling cause showed up and made you irrelevant overnight. The Starlight Gala was barely a footnote in the society pages this year, I hear. They said the catering was adequate. The insult, tailored to her specific vanity, landed like a physical blow. Finally, I turned my cold gaze to Clara. She flinched, physically recoiling in her chair. And you, Clara, you always wanted to be famous, to have the whole world know your name. Well, congratulations, you are. You're the constipation girl, an international meme, a punchline. I hope the multi-million-dollar contract was worth it because your name will never, ever be associated with luxury or beauty again. You should really learn to read your contracts more carefully. I leaned forward, placing my hands flat on the table, my voice dropping to a low, dangerous whisper that filled the silent room. Every single thing you did to me, every theft, every humiliation, I have given back to you, magnified 1,000 times. You stole my education fund to finance her pathetic vanity project, so I took your company. You humiliated me and made me feel small and worthless for a decade. So I stripped you of your precious social standing in a single night. You and your daughter stole my future, so I turned hers into a global joke. This isn't just business. This is a reckoning. This is the bill for my childhood coming due. My father, tears now openly streaming down his face, finally found his voice. It was a pathetic, desperate rasp. Anya, please, I'm your father. The words struck a chord of pure ice in my heart. You lost the right to call yourself that on the day you stood by and watched them throw me onto the lawn, I said, my voice sharp and final. You made your choice every single day for 10 years. You chose them. You chose the path of least resistance. Now you get to walk down that path with them to the very end. I pushed the document and an expensive fountain pen toward him. Sign it. Sign away your legacy, your pride, and your home. In return, I will let you walk out of this building with the clothes on your back. Refuse, and I will not only let the company collapse into a messy public bankruptcy, but I will also personally fund a forensic audit that I absolutely guarantee will uncover years of financial crimes, starting with the embezzlement of a certain college fund my mother left me. You will be left with nothing, and you will spend your twilight years in a prison cell. He stared at me, his soul collapsing behind his eyes. The fight was gone. He was a hollow man. His hand, shaking so badly he could barely hold the pen, scrawled a shaky, illegible signature on the line. When he was done, he pushed the paper back toward me, the single most significant act of his life reduced to a pathetic, defeated gesture. I stood up, the meeting concluded. My security team will escort you from the building. The locks on the house on Elm Street have already been changed. You will be allowed to collect your personal belongings tomorrow under supervision. You have 1 hour to vacate the corporate offices. As the large, silent men in suits entered the room to escort them out, Eleanor turned back, her face a grotesque mask of pure, impotent hatred. You're a monster, she hissed. You made me, I replied calmly, not even bothering to look at her. And for the first time in my entire life, I felt the exquisite, intoxicating peace of total victory. 5 years can change everything. The view from my office is much the same, a sweeping panorama of the city, but my perspective is entirely different. I no longer inhabit the cold, glass and steel skyscraper that served as my war room. My office is now the expansive, sun-drenched library of my grandfather's house. I never let it go. After acquiring all of my father's assets, I discovered that the historical society to which he had willed his home was on the verge of financial collapse. I created a new anonymous trust and made a donation so large it would secure their operations for the next century. Their board was ecstatic. My one condition was that they sell the old Victorian house on Chestnut Street back to the original family's estate, which I now controlled. They agreed without a moment's hesitation. I spent a year and a small fortune restoring it to its former glory. not as a museum, but as a home. I filled its dusty, silent rooms with light, art, and the sound of quiet music. It is my sanctuary, a place cleansed of all the ghosts of my past, except for one. My grandfather's presence is in every room, in the scent of old books and beeswax, a quiet, constant reminder of the man who saw my worth when no one else did. Roth Capital no longer exists as a weapon of vengeance. Shortly after my victory, I restructured it, transforming it into the Roth Legacy Foundation, now one of the country's largest and most respected philanthropic organizations. We specialize in funding scholarships and providing housing for at-risk youth who have aged out of the foster care system or been cast out by their families. I use my grandfather's gift to give other overlooked children the security and opportunity my own family tried so viciously to deny me. It feels like the only fitting tribute to his memory, turning the profits of my war into instruments of peace for others. I rarely think of them anymore. They are figures from a past life, footnotes in my story. But news of their fates occasionally filters back to me through the city's ever-churning gossip mill. My father, I'm told, works as a clerk at a large home improvement store in a neighboring state. He's a quiet, shuffling man who looks perpetually lost, helping people find the right size screws and bags of concrete. He tried to contact me once, a year after the takeover. A rambling, 10-page letter arrived, filled with maudlin regret and self-pity. I burned it in the library fireplace without finishing the first page. Forgiveness is a currency I do not trade in, and he is a bankrupt man. Eleanor's fate is perhaps the most poetically just. Stripped of her husband's money and the social standing it provided, she became a pariah. Her friends, whose loyalty was only as deep as her wallet, abandoned her instantly. She lives in a small, government-subsidized apartment on the bad side of town. The last I heard of her, she had been arrested for shoplifting a tube of expensive French anti-wrinkle cream from a department store where she once had a personal shopper. A desperate, futile attempt to cling to an image, a life, that had long since crumbled to dust. As for Clara, her spectacular public humiliation broke something deep inside her. After a few failed, pathetic attempts to rebrand herself as a victim of cancel culture, she vanished from the internet. A private investigator I hired out of a final, fleeting flicker of morbid curiosity reported that she lives with Eleanor, rarely leaving the confines of their cramped apartment. She is a ghost, haunted not by spirits, but by the global fame she so desperately craved and so horrifically achieved. The old battered leather suitcase sits on a custom-made cherrywood stand in the corner of my office. Its leather is cracked, its brass latches tarnished, but it is my most priceless possession. It's empty now, of course, but it serves as a powerful reminder. It reminds me that sometimes the very things people discard as worthless, as junk, hold the most power. They threw me out with a single suitcase, utterly convinced they were condemning me to a life of nothingness. They had no idea they were giving me everything. My ultimate victory wasn't in taking their company, their money, or their house. It was in building this life, a life of purpose, peace, and quiet, unassailable strength on the ashes of their cruelty. I am happy, I am whole, and I am finally completely free. That is a victory they can never touch, a language they will never understand, and that is the sweetest revenge of all.